As is often the case with homage watches, you'll inevitably get someone telling you to save up for the real one. When that is a $10,000 Rolex, that may not really be a feasible option. And, even if you can save that much for it, should you? That is not quite the case here with this San Martin that looks a lot like a Seiko Sumo. The price difference is much smaller, and realistically, you could save up for the real one. But should you? Welcome to Addicted to Watches. Today, we're looking at the San Martin SN079, which is homaging the Seiko Sumo. This video is going to be one part review, one part comparison. The point of this video is to try and answer the question of whether there is a case of actually making sense to save up for the real deal. For me to really make a case either way though, I'll have to compare a few things between this and the original, including the price difference, the things Seiko does better, and the things that this San Martin does better. After looking at both watches through the same criteria, hopefully I'll come to a position where I can make a judgment call. I feel that I'm relatively qualified to make these comparisons because, although I don't have it anymore, I did own and regularly wear an original SBDC031 for a number of years. Firstly, let's look at the prices. Now, in terms of the San Martin, it's tricky to conclusively give you a price. With all the sales constantly happening, it fluctuates quite a lot. When I bought mine, it was on a clearance sale San Martin were having with a number of their models. This sale went on for quite a bit of time and was easily accessible, so I will be using that pricing for my comparison today. I paid approximately 215 Australian dollars for mine, which I thought was a great price. By comparison, the older version of the Sumo that I bought cost me 42,000 Japanese yen, which currently converts to about 460 Australian dollars. And the more recently released version, the SPB101J, can be had at the moment for $632 after a 5% newsletter sign-up discount. This price may not be available everywhere, but if you shop around, you shouldn't be paying anywhere near retail for one. To simplify our comparisons, let's just say that the original Sumo costs twice as much as the San Martin, and the new Sumo costs 3 times. So, do they offer 2 or 3 times the value of the San Martin? Let's take a look at the watch in front of us here and find out. Starting with the dial, we have what is actually a very nice glossy black dial. I've had a few black dial watches, but they've mostly been matte black, so it was quite a nice change with this one. It's a very deep black that really draws you in. The markers differ from the original Seiko version, with more squared shapes rather than the trapeziums of the Seiko. All indices are applied, as is the frame of the date window at 3 o'clock. Before getting this watch, I had heard good things about San Martin's finishing, and this dial really lives up to it. The brand logo is also applied above the pinion. It's their hexagonal logo. They have used quite a few different logos over the time they've made watches, and this is probably my preferred one. Beneath the pinion, we have the word automatic and 200 meters printed in white. There is no other printing on the dial, such as Japan movement or anything else either side of the 6 marker, which keeps it less cluttered than the Sumo. Around the dial is a minute track chapter ring, with slightly larger rectangles at each 5 minute. You can tell that this watch was not made by Seiko because the chapter ring is actually aligned correctly with the dial. If they really wanted to go the extra mile as a homage, they should have skewed it up just a little bit. For the most part, the hands on this watch match those on the Sumo, except that instead of a paddle second hand, we just have a round lollipop one. The first aspect where the San Martin wins out against Seiko is these hands though. Where the hands on the Sumo are well done but fairly flat, these have small polished bevels running along each edge, which don't always catch the light, but look great when they do. It's a subtle detail that you may not notice at first, but once you do, you can really appreciate it. The other thing I like about these hands is that the second hand is capped, so you don't see any kind of hole at the top of the pinion or hand stack. Moving back out a little, we have the bezel and insert. San Martin have played it fairly safe here, going with the stock standard font for the numbers around the bezel. They have basically taken it a step further than Seiko, who themselves have been toning back the font from the previous version which is the one I had. I honestly liked them that way, as it gave the watch a bit more character, and it stood out a little more from all the other dive watches around. What you will notice is that just like the dial, the bezel insert has a glossy finish. That is because, unlike Seiko's, it's a ceramic insert, which in combination with the dial looks really good. Instead, the Seikos use an aluminium bezel insert. The bezel insert on this San Martin is the same as the one on the Seiko, with a coin edge that is partially covered by the case on the sides. The action, however, is quite different. Where Seiko uses a click spring that can feel very spongy and imprecise at times, San Martin have gone with a more conventional bezel action that feels much more intentional and clicky as you turn it. From here, we can also take a look at the crystal covering those hands. If you were paying this much money to Seiko, you'd of course be getting hardlex. But this watch doesn't come from Seiko. It comes from AliExpress, so you bet it's sapphire, with a slight dome to boot. It also seems like there is some anti-reflective undercoating, but there can't be that much, because this watch still picks up a lot of reflections. The older version of the Sumo that I had also had a domed crystal, but it was only hardlex unfortunately. On the newer version, they did change that to sapphire, which is nice, but the price went up accordingly. So, the San Martin beats out the old gen Sumo and goes toe to toe with the new gen on the crystal. So far, it seems like the San Martin is offering more than both new and old Sumo at the same time as significantly undercutting the price, but we'll have to see if that continues. As far as the case goes, there is literally nothing in between the San Martin and the Sumo. San Martin copied the case shape completely, even down to the drilled lugs for easy strap changes. Credit where credit's due, Seiko really do know how to design a case that wears small. The lugs curve down nicely to hug the wrist, and a sharp undercut from the side of the case helps it to feel less tall than it actually is. Speaking of measurements, they are 44mm across the case diameter, which is big, but just on the edge of manageable for my wrist. The reasonably compact lug-to-lug of 51mm helps with that. The height I mentioned comes in at a not insubstantial 13.5mm, and it is all balanced out by a 20mm lug width. Normally, you would not expect a 20mm lug width on a watch of this size, but, just like on the Seiko, that width on this San Martin actually helps to make the watch overall feel smaller instead of larger. And now we come to the bracelet. It's an interesting one. Here, San Martin decided not to just copy Seiko, but instead changed it up a bit. Before we compare though, let's have a look at what it is. It's a solid 3-piece link bracelet with solid end links and a milled clasp with milled scissor as well. That clasp features a 2-button release, but does not have a fold over for security. On paper, that sounds great. They even tried harder than Seiko to integrate the end links of the bracelet into the case design. You can see this horizontal line running across the links where the surface angle changes. This almost but not quite lines up with that curved section cut out of the inner part of the lugs. Overall, I really don't mind it, and to me it's a step up from the Seiko. But that doesn't mean that the bracelet as a whole is better than the one on the Seiko. Compared to the bracelet I had on my Sumo, this one just feels light and insubstantial. The clasp too. When I first received the watch and took it out of the packaging, I was surprised by how light the bracelet felt, and a little disappointed too. The head of the watch is heavy and feels very solid, but not so when it comes to the bracelet. It could be to do with the fact that the bracelet itself tapers quite significantly, and so there is physically less metal there. But to me, the metal doesn't feel quite right. It doesn't exactly feel hollow, but certainly less solid than all of my other bracelets on my watches. I also recently acquired this movement holder from AliExpress, and it too is much lighter than it looks and than I was expecting it to be. Maybe it is a different combination of metals used to make the steel. That said, it is comfortable on wrist, and the larger than average clasp balances the head of the watch pretty well. One other thing to note in regards to the bracelet is that the end links have an incredibly tight tolerance, so removing this bracelet can take a little bit more wiggling than usual to get the end links out from between the lugs. But once it's off, just like my old Sumo, this watch is a strap monster. So let's check it out on my wrist. Starting on the bracelet, yes it's big, but it's not unwieldy on my 7-inch wrist. The compact lug-to-lug, combined with the curved case shape, means that the lugs don't overhang the sides of my wrist, and the case having a slightly lower center of gravity helps it to not move around too much either. Don't get me wrong, it's got some weight to it, and you won't forget that you're wearing a watch, but it's not uncomfortable. Moving on to some of the other strap options, we have this tan colored NATO strap, which contrasts nicely with the black dial and bezel insert. As I turn my wrist, you can see that ceramic insert as well as the crystal catching the light in a very pleasing way. A grey strap seems to work well on most watches, and this is no exception. It's neutral enough to not clash too much, but at the same time provides a little contrast. For something with a little colour, this red and cream NATO strap looks really well in combination with that black too. There is something I haven't mentioned about the watch yet though. Something that the original Sumo did very well. Something Seiko in general does really well. Of course, I'm talking about the Lume. This watch glows blue rather than green, so I'm guessing it's using BGW9 for the Lume. What I've noticed about this watch is that the initial glow is not spectacular, but it does hang around reasonably well. But if we're comparing it to the Sumo, well, that just blows this out of the water. It has both a brighter initial glow as well as lasts longer. What I feel was a missed opportunity from San Martin here would have been to use a fully lumed bezel insert rather than just having a lume pip. I think the effect of that would have been much more striking, and considering that they include it on many of their other watches, I don't really see a reason not to here. So, we've had a pretty in-depth look at the watch now, and talked a little about how it differs from what Seiko offers. The things it does better, the things it does not. Now, it's time to come back to the question I posed earlier. Is this one of those rare situations where you should save up and get the original? If you look at this watch on paper, absolutely not. What San Martin are offering in terms of pure specs is on par or better than Seiko in almost every way bar the movement inside, which is still a perfectly acceptable NH35. So, if you're just looking for a watch and focus only on the specs, then get this. But the Sumo I had and the new generation of Sumos just have something about them. Something that is not as tangible as a ceramic bezel insert. When I had my Sumo, it had a certain magic about it that I really liked and struck me the moment I tried on the watch. I don't get the same warm fuzzies when I put on the San Martin. Plus, looking at the watch as a whole package, the improvement to the quality of life that a more solid feeling bracelet makes is well worth the price of admission. If you are only interested in the head of the watch and plan to swap out the bracelet for something else anyway, okay, maybe go with the San Martin. But if you are after a Sumo because it's a Sumo, then I can only say the word Sumo so many times in this sentence. Just get the Sumo. If you can find a previous gen Sumo for around that 400 AUD or 260 USD mark, then jump on it. I've seen them going for that even now in some places second hand, but if not, the new gen, while lacking some of the charm of the previous version, I feel, still represents good value with the Sapphire and movement upgrade. So, if you ask me, yes, save your money for the original. In the long run of your collection, you'll thank yourself down the track. What do you think about this watch? Which one would you pick? Do you have a Sumo or other Prospex watch from Seiko? Let me know in the comments and I'll see you next time.